The kitten lay motionless on the cold floor, its tiny body trembling as its back legs dragged uselessly behind it. Each breath came slower than the last. It didn't cry anymore. It didn't struggle. It simply stared ahead with tired eyes, as if it had already decided the pain wasn't worth it anymore. That's when the German Shepherd stepped into the room. People froze. Someone whispered, "Get the dog away." The kitten didn't move. It didn't run. It didn't even flinch. It had no strength left to be afraid. The massive dog lowered its head, towering over the fragile body everyone thought it would harm. But instead of growling, the dog did something no one expected. He lay down beside the kitten, gently nudged its head with his nose, and began licking its face slow, careful, comforting. The kitten blinked for the first time in days. It lifted its head, and in that quiet moment, everything changed. Before we start, make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe. And really, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. No one knew exactly how the kitten ended up there. Some said she'd been found near a roadside, cold and barely breathing. Others believed she was born that way, her back legs twisted, unresponsive, dragging behind her no matter how hard she tried. What everyone agreed on was this: she was fragile, broken, and running out of time. At the shelter, she stayed tucked in the far corner of her crate. Visitors walked past without slowing. They smiled at the playful kittens batting toys, the healthy ones climbing the bars, the ones with bright futures. When their eyes landed on her, their expressions changed: sympathy first, then quiet discomfort. Most looked away. Volunteers tried their best. They fed her by hand, cleaned her gently, spoke to her in soft voices. But they could see it happening. Each day, she moved less. Each day, her eyes stayed open just a little shorter. Hope, whatever small amount she had left, was fading. She tried to crawl once, pulling herself forward with her front paws. Halfway across the floor, she collapsed, breathing fast, body shaking from the effort. No sound came from her mouth. She didn't cry. She didn't ask for help. She simply lay there. To some, she was a lost cause. Too much work. Too much heartbreak. The kind of animal people whispered about, but rarely chose. The kind shelters worried wouldn't make it through the week. What no one noticed, what no chart or prognosis could measure, was that the kitten wasn't just weak, she was lonely. And just when it seemed like the world had quietly decided her story was already over, something walked into her life that no one could have predicted. Something with 4 legs, a massive frame, and a heart big enough to change everything. Every movement hurt. The kitten learned that quickly. When the room was quiet and the lights were low, she would try again, pulling herself forward with trembling front paws, claws scraping softly against the floor. Her back legs followed uselessly, numb weight she couldn't understand or control. After a few inches, her strength vanished, and she collapsed where she was, sides heaving. She stopped trying after a while. Other kittens played nearby, chasing shadows and tumbling over each other in bursts of energy she could no longer imagine. Their tiny paws thudded past her, their laughter like mews filling the air. None of them meant to hurt her, but every rush of movement reminded her of what she WSN single quotes did. Hands reached for her sometimes. Gentle ones. Careful ones. But even kindness felt exhausting. Being lifted meant being moved. Being moved meant pain. So she lay still, eyes half open, watching the world pass without her. At night, when the shelter grew quiet, fear crept in. Not loud fear. Not panic. Just a heavy, sinking feeling that pressed down on her chest. The cold floor. The echoing silence. The sense that no one was coming back for her. She stopped grooming herself. Stopped reacting when food was placed nearby. Her breathing grew shallow, her small body conserving what little energy remained. Volunteers noticed the change, the way she no longer followed sounds. The way her eyes seemed to look through them instead of at them. "She's fading," someone whispered, and they were right. The kitten wasn't fighting anymore, not because she didn't want to live, but because she didn't know how. Pain had taught her limits. Fear had taught her stillness. She had reached the quiet edge where animals sometimes go when the world feels too heavy. And then, just as she was slipping away, something shifted. Footsteps. Heavy ones, and a presence she had never felt before. German Shepherd had a reputation. He was big, too big, some said. Broad chest, thick neck, jaws that made people hesitate before stepping closer. When he walked through the shelter, conversation softened. A few volunteers crossed the aisle instead of passing him directly. Not because he had ever hurt anyone, but because they imagined he could. He'd been surrendered months earlier after his owner passed away. No training issues. No aggression notes. Just a quiet dog who watched everything with serious, intelligent eyes. Still, people labeled him the same way they labeled the kitten. Too much. Too intimidating. So he waited. Day after day. He lay in his kennel, head resting between his paws, listening to the sounds of other dogs leaving with new families. Each time footsteps stopped near his gate, his ears lifted. Each time they moved on, he lowered his head again. That afternoon, the shelter was understaffed. Cages needed cleaning. Animals needed moving. Someone made a decision that would later be whispered about in disbelief. They opened his kennel. "Keep him away from the kitten," one volunteer said quickly. "She's too fragile." One wrong move. The shepherd stepped out calmly, nails clicking softly against the floor. He didn't pull. Didn't rush. His eyes scanned the room slowly, thoughtfully, until they landed on the far corner, on the small, unmoving shape on the floor. The kitten. People tensed instantly. A hand went to a leash. Another voice rose. "Hey, watch him." But the shepherd didn't lunge. He didn't stiffen. He slowed. Every step grew deliberate, careful, as if he somehow understood that what lay ahead of him wasn't something to fear, but something that needed gentleness. The room held its breath. Everyone expected instinct to take over. What no one expected was compassion. The German Shepherd stopped a few feet from the kitten. He lowered his head slowly, sniffing the air, ears forward but relaxed. The kitten felt the shadow fall over her and tensed, expecting pain, expecting the end. She didn't have the strength to move anyway. A volunteer stepped forward, heart racing. "Careful," she whispered, fingers tightening around the leash. The shepherd ignored the tension around him. His attention was fixed on the tiny body in front of him. He took one slow step closer, then another, each movement deliberate, controlled. The kitten's breathing hitched, her body rigid with fear she couldn't escape. Then the dog sat down. Not suddenly. Not forcefully. He folded himself carefully onto the floor, lowering his massive body until his chest touched the ground. His head dipped until his nose was level with the kitten's face. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He sniffed once, and then he did something that made the room go completely still. The shepherd stretched out a single paw and placed it gently beside the kitten, not on her. Not touching her, just close enough to be felt. Warm, steady, present. The kitten blinked. The fear didn't disappear, but it paused. Confusion replaced it. She lifted her head a fraction, eyes searching the dog's face, trying to understand why she wasn't hurting. The shepherd exhaled slowly, a deep, calming breath. His tail thumped once against the floor, soft and slow. Then he lowered his chin to the ground and waited. No movement. Just patience. The volunteers exchanged stunned looks. One wiped her eyes without realizing it, because in that moment, something extraordinary was happening. The biggest animal in the room had made himself small, so the weakest one wouldn't feel alone. The shepherd stayed exactly where he was, breathing slow and steady, as if he were afraid even the sound might scare her away. Minutes passed. No one moved. The room seemed to shrink around them, every eye locked on the unlikely pair. Then the kitten made the smallest sound. A thin, broken mew slipped from her throat, barely audible. Her head wobbled, then lowered again, exhaustion pulling her down. The shepherd reacted instantly, but not with urgency or force. He leaned forward just enough to gently touch his nose to her cheek. The kitten flinched. And then she relaxed. The shepherd began licking her face, slow and careful, each movement soft and deliberate. Not rough. Not excited. Like he was cleaning something precious. The kitten's breathing changed, easing from sharp little gasps into a calmer rhythm. She lifted her head again. This time, she didn't collapse. A low vibration filled the quiet room. At first, no one recognized it. Then someone whispered, "Is she purring?" She was. The first purr she'd made since arriving at the shelter. Weak, uneven but real. The shepherd shifted his body, angling himself to block drafts from the open door. He stretched out fully now, creating a wall of warmth beside her. Without being touched, the kitten inched closer, pressing her tiny body against his chest. The shepherd didn't move away. He didn't look at the people watching. He looked only at her. A volunteer covered her mouth, tears spilling freely. "She hasn't responded to anything," she whispered. "Nothing." The shepherd rested his chin gently on the floor, eyes half closed, completely focused. As if this was the job he'd been waiting for all along. In that moment, something shifted, not just in the kitten, but in everyone watching. This wasn't instinct. This wasn't training. This was choice. Powerful animal choosing kindness when no one expected it. And for the first time in days, the kitten wasn't alone. At first, the kitten didn't understand what was happening. Her body remained stiff, every muscle braced for pain that never came. She stayed pressed against the floor, eyes wide, watching the shepherd from the corner of her vision, waiting for the moment kindness would turn into something else. At the idea in single quotes, the warmth beside her stayed constant. The steady rise and fall of the dog's chest created a rhythm she hadn't felt in a long time, safe, predictable. The shepherd's breathing became something she could lean into, something her small body could rest against without fear. Slowly, almost cautiously, the kitten shifted her weight. It was a tiny movement, barely noticeable, but it mattered. She dragged herself closer by an inch, then another, until her side brushed against the shepherd's fur. She froze, waiting. The dog didn't react. He didn't move away. He didn't tense. He simply stayed. The kitten's ears flicked forward. Her tail gave a weak twitch. Then, with visible effort, she lifted one front paw and placed it gently against the dog's leg, as if testing whether he was real. A soft purr escaped her throat again, stronger. This time, the shepherd opened his eyes and looked down at her, not startled, not excited, just calm. He nudged her paw gently with his nose, then settled back into place. The kitten's body finally relaxed. Her head lowered against his chest, her eyes drifting closed for the first time without exhaustion forcing them shut. She slept not the shallow, restless sleep of pain, but something deeper, something peaceful. Around them, the room exhaled. Volunteers stood frozen, afraid to interrupt what felt like something sacred. One whispered, "She hasn't slept like that ever." The shepherd's tail thumped once, slow and quiet, as if an acknowledgement. For the kitten, the world had been cold, loud, and unforgiving. But in that moment, pressed against a heartbeat stronger than her own, she learned something new. From that moment on, the shepherd refused to leave her side. When volunteers tried to coax him back to his kennel, he stayed planted, body curved protectively around the kitten like a living wall. He watched every movement in the room, calm but unyielding, as if he'd accepted a responsibility no one had assigned him. They brought food for him first. He didn't touch it. Instead, he nudged the bowl closer to the kitten, then looked up at the volunteers, eyes steady and patient. When they brought her a small dish, he waited, didn't eat, until she had taken a few bites herself. Only then did he lower his head to his own food. At night, when the shelter lights dimmed and the building settled into quiet, the shepherd shifted closer. He adjusted himself so his body blocked the draft from the hallway, his tail tucked neatly around her like an extra blanket. The kitten slept pressed into his chest, her breathing slow and even, rising and falling in time with his dot. Something else changed, too, when the shepherd stood. The kitten tried to move. She dragged herself a little farther each time. Front paws trembling, eyes fixed on him as if he were a lighthouse in a storm. When she collapsed, he lay back down instantly, lowering his head to her level until she rested again. Volunteers whispered theories. Maternal instinct. Pack behavior. Coincidence. None of it felt right. This wasn't obligation. This wasn't habit. This was intention. The shepherd followed her progress with a quiet intensity, watching her eat, watching her sleep, watching her try. When she mewed, he answered with a soft huff of breath. When she cried, he nudged her gently back against him. The kitten, who had once stared at the world with empty eyes, began to look up when he entered the room. Her ears perked. Her tail twitched. Life stirred where there had been only waiting. No one had taught him how to do this. He simply knew, and somehow, in choosing her, the shepherd gave the kitten something medicine never could. A reason to stay. It happened just before dawn, when the shelter was quiet and the world felt suspended between night and morning. The kitten tried to move again, farther than she ever had before. Her front paws reached, claws scraping softly as she pulled herself forward. Eyes locked on the shepherd standing a few steps away. She made it halfway, then her body gave out. She collapsed onto her side, breathing fast and shallow, a thin cry tearing from her chest. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The sound cut through the room like glass. The shepherd reacted instantly. He spun around and rushed to her, but instead of crowding her, he stopped just short. His body lowered, his head dipping until his eyes met hers. He whined high, panicked, desperate, and nudged her gently with his nose, over and over, as if trying to wake her from something deeper than sleep. Her breathing slowed. Too slow. A volunteer froze in the doorway. She's crashing, someone whispered. The shepherd let out a sound no one expected, a deep, broken howl that echoed off the walls. Not aggression. Not fear. Grief. He turned toward the humans and barked sharply, pacing, looking back at the kitten, then back at them again. His message was unmistakable. Help her. Now, people rushed forward, hands shaking as they checked her pulse, lifted her fragile body. The shepherd stayed so close his fur brushed her whiskers, his eyes never leaving her face. When they carried her away, he followed, nails clicking desperately on the floor until a volunteer gently held him back. He fought it, not violently, but with heartbreaking insistence. He sat down hard, chest heaving, eyes fixed on the door she'd disappeared through. The room was silent. No one spoke. Because everyone understood what they had just witnessed. This dog hadn't just comforted the kitten. He had chosen her. And when her life slipped toward the edge, he had refused loudly, painfully, to let her go without a fight. In that moment, grown adults broke down because they realized something terrifying and beautiful. If love alone could keep her alive. The shelter erupted into motion. Someone grabbed keys. Someone else called the emergency vet, voice shaking as details spilled out too fast. The kitten was wrapped carefully in a towel, her tiny body frighteningly light, frighteningly still. Every second felt like it mattered more than the last. The shepherd tried to follow again. He paced in tight circles, whining, nose pressed against the towel as if he could will her to stay. When the carrier door closed, he barked sharply and placed himself in front of it, refusing to move. Not angry, terrified. "I know," a volunteer whispered, crouching beside him. "We're trying." The drive felt endless. Red lights. Empty streets. The carrier rocked gently with every turn, the kitten's breathing barely visible. One volunteer reached inside through the grate, fingers brushing her fur, counting breaths under her breath like a prayer dot at the clinic. Doors flew open. The vet took one look and moved fast. Oxygen. 4 fluids. Monitors snapping to life. The kitten disappeared behind swinging doors. Swallowed by bright lights and sterile white, the shepherd was brought inside and told to wait. He lay down directly in front of the treatment room, refusing food, refusing water. His head stayed lifted, ears tuned to every sound behind the door. When someone tried to move him, he didn't growl, he simply didn't budge. Hours passed. No news. The volunteers sat on the floor nearby, exhausted and silent. The shepherd stayed motionless, eyes locked forward, body tense but controlled, as if holding himself together by sheer will. Finally, footsteps approached. The door opened. The vet stepped out, expression unreadable. Everyone stood. The shepherd rose instantly, tail still, eyes searching the vet's face. "We stabilized her," the vet said carefully. "She crashed hard. If she'd come in any later..." He didn't finish the sentence. The shepherd let out a long, trembling breath and slowly sat back down. She wasn't safe yet, but she was alive. The first sign wasn't dramatic. No sudden movement. No loud sound. Just a small change on a monitor that made the vet pause and look again. The kitten's heart rate, once fragile and uneven, steadied. Her breathing, shallow for so long, found a rhythm. "She's responding," the vet said quietly. Word spread through the clinic like a held breath finally released. Volunteers leaned forward, afraid to hope too much. After everything she'd endured, survival still felt uncertain, like glass that could shatter at the slightest touch. When they finally brought her out, wrapped in warm blankets and tubes, the shepherd lifted his head instantly. His body stiffened, then softened, as if relief and fear were colliding inside him. He stood slowly, careful not to scare her, and took one tentative step forward. The kitten stirred. Her eyes fluttered open just a fraction. At first, they seemed lost, then they locked onto something familiar. Her tiny head shifted weakly toward the shepherd, and a faint sound escaped her throat. A purr, not strong, not steady, but unmistakable. The shepherd let out a quiet whine and lowered himself beside her, keeping his distance until the vet nodded. Only then did he move closer, resting his head near the blanket, close enough for her to feel his warmth again. The kitten's breathing deepened. Her small paw twitched, then settled against the fabric, as if reassured simply by knowing he was there. "She's fighting," the vet said. "That makes all the difference." The shepherd stayed like that for hours, unmoving except for the slow rise and fall of his chest. He didn't sleep. He didn't look away. He watched her like a promise he refused to break. For the first time since she'd arrived at the shelter, the kitten wasn't just surviving. She was choosing to stay. Recovery was slow, measured in inches instead of miles. The kitten couldn't run. She couldn't jump. Some days, she barely moved at all. But something inside her had changed. Where there had once been stillness, there was now intention. The vets fitted her with a tiny support brace, light enough not to hurt, strong enough to help. The first time they set her down, she hesitated, front paws shaking as she tested the ground. She slipped, startled by the unfamiliar feeling, and immediately froze. The shepherd was there. He lay down beside her without being asked, pressing his body close enough for her to feel his warmth. He didn't push. He didn't rush her. He simply waited, eyes calm, steady, encouraging. The kitten tried again, She dragged herself forward, then paused, breath quickening. The shepherd nudged the brace gently with his nose, then looked at her face, tail giving a slow, hopeful wag. She answered with a quiet mew and pulled herself one step farther. It wasn't much, but it was everything. Day by day, she grew stronger. Not healed, but braver. She learned how to balance, how to rest without giving up, how to move without fear. Every small victory was met with the same response from the shepherd: quiet pride. He watched. He stayed. He celebrated by simply being there. When she fell, he lowered himself to her level. When she stood, he stood too. When she slept, he curled around her like a living shield. Volunteers noticed the difference. Her eyes were brighter. She groomed herself again. She purred when she heard his footsteps. Pain was still part of her world, but it no longer defined it, because now she wasn't fighting alone. She had learned something vital. Her life didn't need to look like everyone else's to be worth living. It just needed one reason to keep going, and every time she looked up, that reason was waiting. Patient, loyal, teaching her, one step at a time, that living wasn't about what she'd lost. It was about what she was still brave enough to try. Decision didn't happen all at once. It never does. It began with small things, someone noticing how the shepherd paced when the kitten was taken for treatment, how he refused to eat unless she was nearby, how his eyes followed her every movement like a quiet vow. He's bonded, a volunteer said softly one afternoon. They both are. The paperwork sat on the counter for days, untouched. Rules were discussed. Logistics debated. What if it didn't work? What if the kitten needed special care forever? What if the shepherd's size became a problem? But every question faded the moment they were placed together again. The kitten crawled toward him without hesitation, tail twitching, eyes bright. The shepherd lowered himself instantly, meeting her at her level, nudging her gently into the curve of his chest like it was the most natural thing in the world. That was the answer. A foster home became permanent. The forms were signed quietly, almost reverently, as if everyone understood this wasn't a normal adoption. This was a promise being honored. The day they left the shelter, the kitten rode in a padded carrier placed right beside the shepherd in the back seat. He sat tall and still, nose pressed to the mesh, watching her breathe the entire drive home. When the carrier door opened, she didn't hesitate. She crawled straight to him. Their new home was small, sunlit, and peaceful. Soft rugs replaced cold floors. Sunbeams replaced shadows. The kitten explored in careful bursts, stopping often to look back and make sure he was still there. He always was. At night, she slept tucked beneath his chin, her tiny body rising and falling against his chest. The shepherd rested his head protectively over her, eyes half closed. Finally at ease, they weren't broken anymore. They were whole, not because the world had suddenly become kinder, but because they had found each other. And sometimes, that's enough to turn survival into belonging. People tried to explain it afterward. They always do. Some said it was instinct, an older animal responding to weakness. Others called it coincidence, timing, luck. A few suggested pack behavior, misplaced nurturing, or something written deep in the shepherd's genes. But none of those explanations felt big enough, because instinct doesn't wait through the night. Instinct doesn't refuse food until someone else eats. Instinct doesn't stand guard, hour after hour, expecting nothing in return. What this dog did went beyond reaction. It was awareness. The shepherd had been abandoned too, overlooked, labeled difficult. He knew what it meant to be unwanted, to lie still and wait while the world decided whether you were worth the effort. And when he saw the kitten small, broken, giving up, he recognized something familiar. Not weakness, pain. Volunteers, who had worked with animals for decades, admitted they had never seen anything like it. Not with no training. Not with no reward. A bond formed without instruction, without language, without reason anyone could measure. The kitten didn't remind the shepherd of a puppy. She reminded him of himself. And in choosing to protect her, he did something remarkable. He didn't just save her life, he changed the way people around him understood compassion. He reminded them that kindness isn't something animals need to be taught. Sometimes, it's something they remember. Videos of them spread quietly at first, then faster. Messages poured in from people who said the story made them stop scrolling, made them cry, made them believe again in something gentle. Because in a world that often rewards strength, dominance, and speed, this story showed something else entirely. That the strongest heart in the room is often the one that chooses to be soft. That healing doesn't always come from medicine or miracles. Sometimes it comes from presence, from lying down beside someone who is hurting and saying without words, "You're not alone. And I'm not going anywhere." That's why this story didn't just surprise people. It stayed with them because it revealed a truth we all need to remember. Love doesn't ask who deserves it. It simply shows up. Months later, the kitten sat in a warm patch of sunlight by the window, her small wheels resting quietly beneath her body. She watched birds flutter past the glass, tail twitching with interest, eyes bright and curious. Life looked different now, but it felt full. Behind her, the German shepherd lay stretched across the floor, head resting on his paws, watching her like he always did. Not guarding, not worrying, just present, content, at peace. When the kitten moved, he moved. When she stopped, he stopped too. They had learned each other's rhythms so well that words were unnecessary. A glance was enough. A breath. A shift of weight. Visitors often asked which one had saved the other. The answer was never simple. Yes, the dog had stepped in when the kitten was ready to give up. He had offered warmth, protection, and a reason to keep breathing when the world felt too heavy. But the kitten had given something back, just as powerful. She had reminded him that he was needed, that his size wasn't a flaw, that love could still find him even after being overlooked. Together, they healed places no vet could reach. At night, they still slept the same way. The kitten tucked beneath his chin. The shepherd curled protectively around her. Two lives that had once been written off, now bound together by something stronger than survival. Hope. If you ever wonder whether kindness still exists in unexpected places, remember this story. Remember that compassion doesn't always come from people, and heroes don't always look the way we expect. Sometimes they have four legs, sometimes they choose softness over strength. And sometimes they save a life simply by lying down beside it and refusing to leave. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to like and share it with someone who needs a reminder that love can come from anywhere. Subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories like this, because the world needs more reminders that even in broken moments, healing is possible. All it takes is one heart brave enough to stay.